Hello, welcome to Bridging of Ages. My name is Dan Mendelevitz. Today we're talking about why intergenerational matters. Continue our discussion on intergenerational teams. And we really want to get into how the intergenerational differences improve innovation and resilience. And we've talked about that in some previous shows and how that helps your productivity and how it actually brings a lot of strength and helps reflect what your customer base looks like and the people you serve in your organization. And this is how it empowers people and helps them navigate uncertainties in modern life. So today we'll talk about those intergenerational topics and why it really matters. I have a special guest today, Mike Poliwoda. Mike is a Canadian author living in Western Quebec. His work explores the intersection of identity, responsibility, and how people construct, lose, and rediscover their sense of self while navigating the pressures and uncertainties of modern life. He's the author of 5 books. And Mike's work reflects an eclectic, curious, and observant approach to storytelling across genres. And one of the things that we've talked about in previous shows are how stories are so important in the interactions when people work and live together. And so we'll get into with Mike with some of why intergenerational matters and how we can just retain that resilience and how that can help us along. So after a message from our sponsor, Mike Poliwoda will be joining us as our guest on Bridging of Ages. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, welcome to Bridging of Ages with my guest, Mike Poliwoda. Today we're talking about why intergenerational matters, part of our series on intergenerational teams. Welcome, Mike.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Dan. Really appreciate it.
All right. Great to have you today and looking forward to our conversation together. As part of your work and your writing, how do you communicate and enhance working with different ages and experience levels?
You know, that's a great question, Dan, because what I find is that sometimes conflict is can be a generational thing, misunderstood in many cases. And so what I've done in many of my stories is that I've tried to depict sort of the an older, more established view and a younger view, and it goes from conflict to understanding. And that's sort of there are a few stories where that's very prevalent. Um, and so I think that's been a part of the work that I've done. Certainly not every story, but certainly understanding the importance of bridging a gap and bridging understanding, because there's so much to learn.
Okay, great. And as I've seen, you've found ways to get them to communicate, even though they might not have a common language because of their differences in ages and experience levels. And so I've noticed you really take a humorous view of kind of everyday frustrations and that we all live with. And I'm curious, you already mentioned that you're looking at the different view for the different ages there, and just curious how does that really land across the different ages? Because humor can be very specific to your experience.
Well, I think you're referring to the haiku, and what I've done with Rage Slam Haiku is um, I've taken multi generational approaches in two ways. So it's a humorous haiku of interactions with my mother, um, and the chapter is called "Stuff My Mom Says,"
Hmm.
and then I have another intergenerational between me and my kids, which is stuff my kids and I say to each other. And so it's so what it does is it makes light of, if I can give you a quick example, 17 and
Certainly.
17
Yeah.
in 17 syllables, stuff my mom would say like, I see you've gained weight. Are you sad that she left you? Maybe lose some weight. So these types of uh, of interactions, you know, they're not meant to be hurtful, right? They're a generation speaking in their tone, and so
Uh-huh.
and so creating that understanding and finding the humor in it. Like, of course, your feelings are going to get hurt when your mom says something like, "You never call me. I could be lying here dead and no one would know." Um, so understanding where that's coming from, because there are communication nuances, you know,
Yes.
with generations, right? And I'm sure we all experience it with our kids, with our parents, and with people of different generations. So in the haiku book, it was just a way to make light of it. And I got to say, my mom thought it was hilarious.
Well, that's great. That's great that she took it in that regard. And how about your kids?
Oh,
Besides forgiving.
they they're teenagers, so it's yeah, okay, Dad. Most of it is an eye roll, but my youngest does enjoy my
Ah,
books.
okay. Uh-huh.
But okay, I'll give you.
Well, I mean, they look at things as dad jokes. There you go. So,
Well, that's exactly it, right? Um, we've fallen into that what is it, the stereotype now, which is
yeah.
oh, it's just a dad joke, right?
Uh-huh. Well, but that's also a form of communication in itself. I mean, part of it is an expectation of them of you, and vice versa. It's and what I talk about a lot with, and I talk about these intergenerational teams, it really has a lot to do with that communication.
Yeah.
How do we find that central communication that we can hear each other and understand each other? Obviously, when we go off, we're going to use a different style, but how do we meld those? And I think some of your work shows that. Like you said, you found humor in the fact that a different, age and experience were able to look at that and say, okay, that's funny, even though, yeah, it kind of meant it at the time.
Yeah. No, it's so true, Dan. And when you were giving your opening monologue and talking about teams, when about 20, oh gosh, over 20 years ago, um, my first job in the private sector was working for a consulting firm.
Uh-huh.
What was amazing about that job is that every department had a senior counsel, which was a semi-retired professional within the sector
Uh-huh.
who provided guidance for the staff. And I'd never seen it before, and I hadn't seen it since. And it was such an amazing model because uh, the younger staff, the less experienced staff, could
Uh-huh.
always go to the senior council and seek advice, seek direction, seek insight, and it was such a beautiful model. And I don't know if that's still valued today, but I thought I'd share that with you because your opening monologue made me think of it.
Yeah, well, you're talking about a mentoring situation, which is very non-threatening and kind of open. It sounds like they're willing to teach and learn. At the same time, you have that energy and innovation coming from the younger ones. And hopefully, as I've said before, all mentoring situations that I've been part of, the successful ones are when we both learned. And that's quite critical.
Yeah.
So I know you do a lot about storytelling, and this kind of ties into this. Uh, I think in some ways, we've kind of lost the art of storytelling. At the same time, we tell stories differently nowadays. And I'm curious of what is the importance of storytelling, and how does that work in everyday interactions?
It's a good question because we see a lot of stories on social media, right? Like
Hmm.
everything is a story. But um, I still firmly believe that the passing of stories from parent to child, from grandmother to grandkids, it's so crucial, and I hope that it isn't a lost art. My mom lives about 4.5 hours away from here, and so what I do is when there are birthdays or holidays,
Hmm.
she's at an age where she's not comfortable doing the drive, so I'll just go and get her. And I've in the last few years since I've been doing this, since she stopped driving, I've learned so much about my mom in that 4 hour drive, things I had
Uh-huh.
no idea, things that made me understand her upbringing, her experiences, her perspectives. Like she grew up in Morocco, so like learning of her experiences there and her travels and her life with my dad, who God rest passed away at a young age. Um, just having those stories and then being able to share those stories with my kids. Hey, did you know grandma? And rather than doing it on the phone, or sorry, I mean, like, rather than scrolling stories,
Texting. Yeah.
it's like being able to sit with my kids. And I gotta say, sometimes it's hard to pull them away from video games or YouTube or whatever. But and to have those stories, like to say, no, dude, put down your phone. Let me tell you about a conversation I had with grandma. And I think it's important. And my only concern is that when my kids are grown and when they have families of their own, you know,
Hmm.
are they going to remember those stories, or are they going to be just screen people?
Yeah, well, storytelling has been important as long as there's been humans. I mean, it used to be the only way you could get news, and you had the traveling minstrels. You had all sorts of different stories were important to hand down from the elders to the youngers, and it's really important. And I think yeah, I'm sure you come across it since you've been writing so much lately. And it's people are, even though we record everything nowadays, we don't necessarily retain it. Because I know the other day I was we have this wonderful botanic garden here in Chicago area, and I like to take pictures with my eyes. I do take some pictures with my phone, but I saw some people who just walked around with their video and looked through their phone the entire time. And I found that very sad. That was the loss of the story, loss of what they'd actually seen. Who knows if they ever even look at that video?
No, it's so true. Like, the more we use our devices for things, the less connected we are to what is actually happening. And I heard somewhere, I think it was a Harvard professor talk about the disconnect, left brain, right brain. Like, we think we're connected, because screens are left brain, and we think we're connecting, but we're actually not connecting at all, because the screen creates that sort of left brain thinking and ignores right brain thinking. I'm probably not doing the explanation justice.
That's okay.
But
I'm not an expert in brain health. So.
but to your point, no, it's so true. So many things that we do with our screens that we just forget. Like, I have, I'm sure, like everyone else, I have 12,000 photos and videos on my phone, and then when I'm running out of memory, I transfer them to my computer. I never look at them. Maybe when I'm doing a holiday card, I may pick some photos, right? But yeah, you're so right, and it's that disconnect. So back to your point about the telling of the stories, I think that's why it's so important, And when I started writing in 2022, it were the stories. I've got stories about loosely based on my father. I've got stories loosely based on my own experience, loosely based on things that I've seen, based on encounters that I've had, things that I heard from other people. I have a story in Scars called Just a Man. And I was coming home from work one day. I went into a bar, a pizza, like it was a pizza place bar, right? On College Street in Toronto, like a pretty funky neighborhood. And I was sitting at the bar. I was having a drink, deciding on whether I was going to eat. And there was this guy sitting a few stools away. He had a Russian accent. We had a conversation. He was an older guy. And we started talking. And he was really interesting. And he told me a story that was mind-blowing about how he defected from the Russian army, how he joined the Foreign Legion, how he ended up in Canada. And that story was so moving for me that I actually wrote a story about that encounter, because it was so amazing, so random, so beautiful. And when he got up and left, he handed me a business card. And on the business card, it had his name, and it said, "Just a Man." It's wild.
That's great. Yeah. One of the things you talk about, the stories, and what I'd like to do is we're going to take a short break, word from our sponsor. And then when we come back, I'd like to get a little more into the various books you've written, but also how you help younger and older people than yourself appreciate storytelling because of that interaction and how it really helps those intergenerational communications. And we'll be right back. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, this is Bridging of Ages, and we're talking about why intergenerational matters with my guest, Mike Poliwoda. And as we were talking about before the break, the importance of storytelling and how you help people, especially younger than yourself and also older than yourself, with different experience levels and different ages, really appreciate storytelling and how that can really enhance their intergenerational interaction. It's just, like to hear about from you also as an author, some of the books that you've given us.
Thanks, Dan. So in my first book, I mentioned the story of the Russian soldier. I shared a story. I have a story called Truck Stops, and it's loosely based on my father's experiences. He was a long distance truck driver, and share that story with my kids. And I can't read that story without getting emotional. But my kids read it, and they were fascinated. They're fascinated by his stories of the army, shooting off his finger because he was goofing around with a gun. And so being able to share that, because they never met him. He died long before they were born. And so sharing those stories and being able to create, how do I put this? Let their imaginations work. When we're sharing stories, we're trying to, not intentionally, but sort of promote imagination, thoughts, visualizing rather than having pictures on the screens. And I think that's one way we can maintain that legacy is to share our stories with our kids, with our families, with our friends. How many times have you been at a table in a restaurant and you look over and everybody at that table is on their phones?
Frequently, yes.
The dinner table. The best way I think we can help is just to talk. And sometimes I'll say to my kids, dude, put your phone down. Once they get past that initial restlessness, it's important. And I don't know, like I don't in my books, in my work, I don't sort of pretend to have answers. Just sort of insights and thoughts. And if things that I write resonate with people, that's fantastic. But it's really about sharing stories and expressing perspectives in a non-judgmental, like in a very neutral way, because really stories shouldn't be about judgment. They should be about sharing, sharing experiences.
Wow, that's great. That's a great point. Yeah. I think there's a perception that young people have these very short attention spans and, can't concentrate on a book. And I know that the reading of books in general has gone down. People read more words, but not necessarily long form. On the other hand, if you watch a young person play a video game, they can concentrate.
Absolutely.
So it's there, and I think it's too easy for us to say it isn't there. And you're giving them an opportunity, something that fascinates them, obviously. So I think part of it, and what I found when I'm leading intergenerational teams, is part of it is to understand where they're coming from and find a way to communicate with them. Yeah, it could be short form, but we can also have conversations. I have with my own son who, we put the phones down and we can have a long conversation, and it's beautiful. And like you said, we're telling the stories, I'm telling the stories of my family and where he came from. And, we talk about, fortunately, he loves history, so we're able to talk, some really more long form stuff. But I think we have to be careful of those unconscious biases that people we interact with in a different generation can't communicate with us, because it sounds like you've found a way to do that.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. You're absolutely right about the biases, because we look at these these videos that they watch, these quick hits, these quick videos. But you're right. Put them in the video games. And so what I've been doing with my youngest, he's more of a reader. He's more of a sort of a computer kid. My older one's more of an athlete. But when we take the dog for a walk, and we go for these long walks, and I say, Jack, come on, let's go. Oh, Dad, I don't want to. Jack, come on, let's go. And Jack, he'll go with me, and he will talk the whole time.
Wow.
He'll tell me about the book that he's reading. Now he's reading something called The Yellow King. It's an old story, mysticism and that sort of thing. Really cool. Very interesting interest. But he tells me about his Minecraft game. He tells me about some of the things he's building, and I just keep my mouth shut and I listen. And half hour, 45 minutes later, we're home, and he's just paused the screens to express himself. And for me, that's the most beautiful thing. And I'll tell you, when he's old enough to say, Dad, I'm not going, that'll be a sad day for me.
Well, I think, you're talking about the art of active listening, which I talk about a lot of my shows. And, it's a lot of times, and you'll see, especially in a business sense or an organizational sense, we wait for the other person to finish so we can interject. So if you're doing that, you're not hearing what they had to say. And one of the things that I teach is that active listening, where you concentrate and listen to what they really had to say before you respond and allow them to talk. Similar to like we're having a conversation now. To really listen what the other person's doing. It sounds like you've already found that art.
It's something that you learn sometimes when you're trying to get through to someone, when you're trying to connect with people. I have this sort of rule in my head: talk less, listen more. And that's sort of helped out with my kids, because a lot of times it's like, what? You did what? You said what? You're reading what? You saw what on YouTube? What are you talking about? Where did you find this stuff? Like the interrogation, right? And that never goes anywhere positive.
No, it does not. And I think you found some of the secret sauce, and you've done it in your writings too, where and that's why the intergenerational matters. You found that connection and a way to have someone who may normally not do long conversations actually have them, because they know they've been heard. They know you listen. And that's all beautiful. Well, I thank you for joining us today. It's been a wonderful conversation. And, I'm looking forward to reading more of your works. And, it really is, it's nice to get some of your insights and how, and why this intergenerational dialogue is so important, and how it works. So we're gonna step away from another word from our sponsor, and then when we come back, we'll wrap it up with some action items and tips that we got from our wonderful conversation today. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you so much, Dan. I really appreciate it.
Welcome back to Bridging of Ages. If you're just joining us, we've been talking about why intergenerational matters with my guest, Mike Poliwoda. And at this point, we're going to take a look at some of the action items that you can take from our conversation. Let's take a look. Action item 1. Work on finding your true identity. This is really about getting to know your own story and how to be able to communicate those to others. Think about it. We all communicate in different levels. And as Mike talked about, there's always that opening. You can put down the phone. You can find a way to talk to a person of a different age and experience. Action item 2. Understand your limiting beliefs. So we talked about the biases that you carry unconsciously and the conscious ones that you may be aware of. And those can limit you because, like we talked about in the conversation, there's this assumption that younger people can't do long-term concentration. And then we said, well, take a look at video games and other things they do day to day. And everybody has that ability. And even though we have a lot of short form things in today's world, everybody can do that long form. And as you know, you can take a book that Mike is writing and you can have that opportunity to do those things that get past your limiting beliefs. Action item 3. Celebrate intergenerational wins out loud. So you really want to communicate your story and accept stories from other people. You know, we use humor, we use conversation, we use other forms of communication in order to make that happen. So once again, our action items. Action item number 1, work on finding your true identity, get to know your own story. Action item 2, understand your limiting beliefs, use humor to deal with everyday frustrations, and get past those unconscious biases and really look for them. Action item 3, celebrate intergenerational wins out loud. As we talked about with Mike, he's able to communicate at different levels with different generations and able to communicate his story and give a chance for the other person to give them his. So the tip of the day today: as a person of integrity, others will follow your lead. So you are not defined by your age. You are defined by what you present and how you listen, and so that people feel heard. This has been Bridging of Ages. My name is Dan Mendelevitz. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can see the QR code in the corner and have an opportunity to see some of our earlier shows and build on your knowledge. Thank you for joining us in Bridging of Ages with my guest, Mike Poliwoda. Invest in brain power, fuel brilliance.